Hey guys, and welcome back to the channel. For today's video, we're going to be having a discussion in regards to the topic of scale within the Transformers mainline. With my most recent review of the Legacy Leader Class Blitzwing, it's certainly been a topic of controversy as to whether or not that specific figure was worthy of the Leader Class price point, or if it should have in fact actually been packaged as a Voyager. There is in fact a significant price increase between the nowadays Voyager price point and of course the Leader price point, and figures just overall are going up in terms of cost. So Hasbro are now charging more for the figures, and some think that they are in fact actually receiving less, which in some cases is in fact actually true. So for today's video, I thought that I'd just give you guys my opinions as to why certain characters end up in the Leader class, whether that be down to accessories, parts count, engineering, or just in terms of them being a much larger character. And I'll also be giving you guys a comparison between some of the previous Leader figures that we've seen throughout the past decade, starting off in 2011, then of course taking a look at when they did in fact actually change the scale yet again for the Prime Wars trilogy, and then when we most recently saw yet another scale decrease in the War for Cybertron trilogy. Now, of course, this is all my own personal opinion, so everything in this video is subjective. I'm not saying that anything is 100% facts, it's just personally what I've gathered, having collected Transformers for quite some time, so I'd really love to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below as to whether or not you guys agree with this video, or if you think that I've completely missed the mark. So we may as well kickstart by taking a look at what was one of the final almost true to form leaders that we had gotten used to throughout kind of 2000 to 2010/2011, that being the Leader class Ironhide that we saw for Transformers Dark of the Moon. Now, the Transformers 3 Leader line was really and truly the last time we kind of saw Leader class figures as we had come to know them. Massive figures with a ton load of gimmicks packed into them, really intricate conversions, and of course electronic lights and sounds. Nowadays we do not see any electronics or lights on our Leader figures, which in some ways is a massive positive, and I'll touch base with that in just a second. But you can see that this guy is massive. Now, not only is he packed load of different gimmicks, but he's also an incredibly hefty figure. The plastic on this guy feels great, almost up there with what you would expect from either the Commander class or even a movie masterpiece figure. And I put that down to the simple fact of inflation. From 2011 up until the present day 2022, materials just cost a lot more than they did over a decade ago. So that is why I think, say, the Commander class is almost on par with what you would expect from a Leader class back in the 2011-2010, is just because the plastic is so much more expensive. Now, with this figure, of course, we saw spring-loaded gimmicks, we had electronics within the chest, a massive battery compartment, and then as we moved on to, say, Power of the Primes, the Prime Wars trilogy, this was kind of our new standard set for Leader class figures. So you can see not a massive decrease in terms of the scale. This still was a very large figure. You can see that in terms comparing it here next to the Ironhide, it is only a smidge smaller, but one thing that you can definitely tell when having these guys in hand is just how much lighter and almost cheaper feeling this Power of the Primes Optimus feels when in comparison here to this Ironhide. Now, this is where I really do think inflation has to factor in. I think pretty much all of the Prime Wars trilogy figures was sadly kind of plagued with pretty cheap plastic. Of course, in the War for Cybertron trilogy, the prices did slightly increase, and so did the quality, but we'll touch base more with that in a second. And another noticeable difference between these two is that this was kind of our first sort of Leader assortment that did not have the lights and sounds packed into it. Now, personally, I actually think overall it's a huge positive. Where you had a huge battery compartment in the older Leader class figures, it really did restrict Hasbro and Takara in the engineering. Of course, from a transformation perspective, all of the joints had to work around this massive compartment, and any region of which had batteries in was basically completely impossible to touch. So therefore, without a huge battery compartment, it really did allow Hasbro and Takara to massively refine the engineering, which is why this specific Optimus here looks a lot more slimmer and a lot more accurate to how he appeared in G1, when in comparison here to Ironhide, which is in fact incredibly bulky here in the torso. And this figure here isn't even a prime example of batteries ruining the overall figure. Something which comes to mind would be the Leader class Dark of the Moon Sentinel. He had that massive battery compartment actually attached onto his back, which made him incredibly top heavy. And if you look at the figure from a side perspective, he does have this kind of huge block that just sticks out when in comparison to the rest of the back. So once again, I definitely do think that scrapping batteries in the long run was a good thing. But then with our War for Cybertron trilogy, after we just wrapped up here with the Prime Wars trilogy, we once again saw yet another decrease in terms of scale, making what is now our Kingdom or Siege Ultra Magnus the new standard for leaders going forwards. Now, the reasoning behind why this guy is so much smaller, Hasbro said it's because they're trying to make all of the figures in scale, which once again I think is a massive positive. For those of you who will recall, especially in some of the older Michael Bay movies, we would see massive Leader class Bumblebee figures, which was just way out of scale when in comparison to, say, a Voyager Optimus or a Voyager Megatron. It really didn't make much sense, and I know especially for me, collecting the Revenge of the Fallen and the Dark of the Moon toy line, it was really difficult to kind of strike a balance between scale. You'd have deluxe figures of which were supposed to be, say, in the Voyager or Leader. Something which springs to mind was that we saw a Blackout out in the Voyager, but of course the actual character in the movie was massive. So I am in a lot of ways grateful that with the War for Cybertron trilogy, Legacy, and the Studio series, that they appear all to be in pretty cohesive scale. But you can once again see a massive kind of decrease between the Power of the Primes Prime Wars trilogy Optimus leader and of course our new Legacy leader, which brings me on to the larger scale leader figures. So here we have Kingdom Ultra Magnus, and bringing out Galvatron and Double Dealer. The reasoning behind why all three of these have been packaged as leaders is just because in general the characters are massive in the show. These are in fact some of the biggest characters that we've actually seen. So for example, Ultra Magnus could not have been a Voyager, he needs to be a leader class. Same can also be said here with Double Dealer. This guy is a very, very big leader and is also a triple changer and comes with quite a significant amount of accessories. And then where Galvatron is concerned, now whilst this guy is slightly shorter when in comparison to these two and maybe doesn't feel as heavy as them, he is still too big to be a Voyager class, and in order to kind of justify that leader class price point even more, they did in fact actually package in a few additional accessories such as these two revenge ships, as well as here the Matrix of Leadership. So whereas with these guys you can see that we get the missile pods as well as Ultra Magnus's signature G1 gun, he really doesn't come with anything extra, whereas these would definitely be regarded as extra accessories that perhaps you wouldn't really necessarily want. And here with Double Dealer, he comes with pretty much everything that the original toy came with, that being the massive rocket, that almost signal dish thing here at the top, as well as the gun. So Galvatron is kind of in a bit of a limbo. He's maybe not as big as our biggest leader, but he's too big for a Voyager, and in order to once again justify that price point, this is a very, very dense figure. Almost every single aspect of this guy feels premium. There's really and truly no hollow spaces on him whatsoever, so I personally wouldn't mind paying a little more to get a better version of a figure. But then we turn to what is kind of the second scale in now our modern day leader class assortment. And then we turn here to these three figures, which are essentially an almost second scaling within our already modern leader class. These are basically Voyager scale figures if you were to compare them to other mainline figures, but in the case of Astro Train and Blitzwing, in regards to parts count and complexity of their conversion, definitely up there with some of the more recent leader figures, say such as Ultra Magnus. And you'll also notice that these guys are pretty chock-a-block here in their robot modes. There are literally barely any hollow spaces on these guys at all, and had they been packaged as Voyagers, I really don't think they would have turned out as great as they have. Now, considering that of course they don't quite meet the criteria for being Voyager, but yet are still a little smaller when in comparison to our traditional leader class figure, what Hasbro have now started to do is package in additional accessories. So here in the case of Astro Train, they gave us this massive almost cargo bay, which had a ton of additional accessories within, which personally I thought was a great touch, and at least to me I have no issue in fact actually thinking that this guy justifies the leader price point. And the same can also be said here for Blitzwing. We of course do get three of his more traditional signature G1 weapons, and then these really bizarre, almost Hulk-busting hands. Now, like many of you, personally, I would have much rather had seen these scrapped for maybe a slight increase in terms of scale, or perhaps some refinements made in regards to transformation for the jet mode. But overall, if you actually take into account the entire package, this is a leader class. In terms of how much plastic we're seeing, how much engineering and paint, etc., this guy is definitely not going to fit in a Voyager class price point. But a case of where I think Hasbro maybe have taken the slight mick would be in regards here to the Siege Shockwave. Now, this guy, in regards to engineering, doesn't hold a candle compared to these. These are so much more intricate. These are triple changes. They've got so many more steps, so many more parts. So this is really where I think Hasbro have taken what is basically one of the most popular characters that they can find, made him the best that they can, and then in order to justify that leader price point, they've packaged in a really throwaway accessory, that being this shock drone that basically you could have broken up into individual components and slapped on as additional armor. So this is one of the rare instances where I do kind of think this figure here, had it not come with this, would have been a Voyager. For me at least, they just upped the price so that they could charge more for a more popular character. And once again, yes, it's not the greatest, but in terms of an actual Shockwave figure, much like these two, it's fantastic. It really doesn't have that many hollow components. It's built out of incredibly robust and durable plastic, and overall is probably one of our best mainline Shockwave figures that we've ever seen. But it really is a case in point of them here packaging additional accessories in order to inflate the price. So yes, in regards to Shockwave, I definitely think that he should have initially been packaged as a Voyager, but honestly, if I compare him to the likes of Astro Train, this guy feels feels so much heavier, the transformation is so much more intricate, and the same can also be said here for Blitzwing. This guy feels a lot heftier when in comparison here to our Shockwave. And just to kind of give you guys a comparison between these leaders to the other scale of leaders that we already have in our new mainline, you can see that our current largest leader, Ultra Magnus, does in fact actually tower over these two. But as mentioned previously, this guy does kind of fit in an almost limbo. He's too big for a Voyager in terms of parts count, too small to be a leader. So what do? They package in a few additional accessories, really just to kind of fill out that leader price point. And at least where this figure and Blitzwing is concerned, I really don't have much of an issue with that. However, where the likes of Shockwave comes into the equation, I do kind of think that this is Hasbro taking the mickey a little bit. They're giving us one of the most popular characters as a higher price point release, when really and truly he could have just been a Voyager from the offset. And this discussion doesn't really even end at leader class. It does also continue into the commander class. For those of you who will recall, this time last year, we were all having a very similar debate in regards to the Commander Siege Jetfire compared next to the Kingdom Commander class Rodimus Prime. You can see even here, there's a stark difference in terms of scale. Jetfire really did set the tone for how big a commander class figure should have been. And when you compare these guys, there's no denying that Rodimus is a lot smaller than Jetfire. But it was a very similar situation to Astro Train and Blitzwing. This guy was too big to be packaged as a leader, but yet too small to be packaged as a commander class. In regards to engineering and from an actual build quality perspective, he's probably one of our best mainline figures. He feels a lot better, a lot more well built when in comparison to some of our mainline leader figures. So in order to kind of worthy justify that price point, Hasbro packaged in this massive, really well built trailer. Now granted, I know there are quite a few out there who would have much rather had just seen the Rodimus, but the vast majority of us, I'd say at least, wouldn't want Rodimus Prime without the trailer. And in order to give us a proper well built trailer, he had to justify the commander price point, and I definitely think they gave this guy all of the bells and whistles to really fill out that price point. The trailer's made out of very thick and robust plastic. It feels so much better when in comparison to, say, the likes of the leader class Earthrise Prime trailer. As we just open it up, you can see how it had a massive turret. We had all of these hidden compartments which came with loads of different accessories such as various different blast effects. We got a gun with Rodimus, we also saw a sword. So at the end of the day, I really do also think that this is another instance of us actually paying for the engineering and parts count. So what is the solution in regards to this? Well, we don't have to buy these figures. We can in fact actually leave the likes of Rodimus Prime on store shelves, and of course the likes of Legacy Blitzwing. But then personally, what I think would happen if we were to do that would be we'd see a very similar situation to the Prime Wars trilogy. Hasbro would begin kind of cutting corners, giving us figures of which are not well built, as not well engineered as perhaps we would have liked. And personally, I don't mind paying the extra additional cost if we're receiving a quality product. And I definitely think that the Commander Rodimus Prime, as well as the Legacy Leader Blitzwing, is a quality product. I think that in regards to some of the previous versions that we've seen of those characters, these are by far some of the best. And I really do think that these kind of almost scale points that we used to see back in the day, Leader, Voyager, Titan, etc., really and truly have now just become a price point. If you're going to see a Commander class Rodimus, you're not going to see a massive figure anymore. You're going to see a into scale figure, but a very well engineered, very well constructed, very well built character with a ton of accessories of which do in fact actually fit the character of Rodimus Prime. As mentioned beforehand, I would have really been disappointed had we not received the trailer, as that is a part of the character, and the same can also be said for Blitzwing. Had he been packaged as a Voyager, I really don't think he would have turned out as well as he had. He'd probably be incredibly hollow where the legs are concerned, much like we saw with some of those Titans Return figures. So in all, I really do think that it just comes down to receiving a quality product. We can pay less, but then receive poor quality, or we can pay more and of course receive a better quality figure. The exception to that though is the likes of the Siege Shockwave, and even the Siege Springer to an extent. That figure does in fact actually have a lot of parts where it is concerned. It is also a triple changer, much like Astro Train and Blitzwing, but the reasoning behind why I think that guy was made into a Voyager and not a leader is because he's not as much of a big name character. So you also have got to factor that in. I do think that in regards to the popularity of a character, Hasbro's more likely to put that in the leader class price point, as they know collectors are going to go crazy for a Blitzwing, they're going to go crazy for an Astro Train, crazy for a Shockwave. So I do think that it is an almost mix. I do think that quality has a lot to play into it, but then once again, Hasbro is a business, so they're going to want to get as much out of their consumer as they possibly can. So it really is just kind of a juggle. At the end of the day, it's going to be down to the consumer or collector. It is ultimately their choice as to whether or not they decide to pick up these characters, and as many of us say on these types of platforms, you have to vote with your wallet. If you're happy with the look and the quality of a product, then buy it, but if you're not, leave it on store shelves, and that will in fact actually send an indication to Hasbro as to what collectors are willing to buy and how much they're willing to pay for that specific character or item. when in comparison to, say, a much cheaper alternative. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this discussion video. Once again, this is all my own personal opinion as to kind of the backstory as to what goes into designating leader figures, the difference in terms of scale as to why smaller characters do in fact actually find themselves in larger price point assortments. I'd really love to hear your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you guys agree or disagree? Are there any points that you guys think that maybe I missed in today's video? And of course, let me know your own thoughts down in the comment section below. I thank you all for watching, and until my next video, I'll see you then. Thanks for watching.